Hi folks, and welcome back into the second practicum in our first module, working with QGIS and the Wadi Hassa Archaeological Survey data. I have QGIS opened again, and firstly apologize for the weirdness of the first video practicum. As I mentioned in class, you can go back to the 2022 version to see the full screen, knowing that we're working with the Wadi Hassa data. We're going to cover a couple of those things again today, so I think it's not a big deal. Hopefully you'll be able to figure out what was actually off screen in that video. So I have QGIS open again, and I just want to kind of go back over a couple of things for the interface. Firstly, when you first open QGIS, you're going to have this central panel that says Recent Projects. This is a very convenient feature. It is sort of reverse chronological order of all the stuff you've been working on. Now you'll see I have a bunch of stuff in here because I work with QGIS often. You will probably just have the one Wadi Hassa project. You can double click on this to reopen it up, and that's kind of helpful to just keep working from a day-to-day basis. And again, you can also go to Project, you can click Open and navigate through your file tree to find it. You can also go to Open Recent, and it has the same list that you're seeing in the middle tab, sort of right there. And then the other way to do this is to go into your browser tab over here and to navigate through your file tree that way. So in my case, I'm going to Home, which is my computer's home directory, and as I mentioned in class, I have a GIS projects folder where I'm going to keep all my GIS projects. And so if I open that, you can see that I actually have 3 QGIS projects saved at this particular time. Wadi Hassa is one of them, and under Wadi Hassa you will see that I have the Wadi Hassa QGIS project file. This is the actual sort of official file that saves the layers and the stylings and all of that kind of stuff. But I also have the directories, the folders, that have the raw GIS data that I'm working with in this project. And if you follow my advice, you're going to make new folders within every project folder, at least raster and vector, and within them you're going to make directories to hold the primary data, your vector sites points in this case, and your raster elevation file. One thing that I want to point out is if you're deep in this browser and you're getting a little confused as to where this stuff actually is on your computer, you can actually right-click on this and click Open Directory, and it will open in your computer's file browser that folder, and you can actually see what is within there. Okay, so that's a little helpful tip to help you kind of not forget where stuff is actually saved. But back to the Wadi Hassa project folder. I'm going to double click on the Wadi Hassa GIS project file. It takes a little bit of time, but it's basically going in there, figuring out what layers were displayed, why it closed. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, I'm back. Actually, this is a salient point. Always save as you go. GIS software is pretty stable these days, but anything could happen. I have no idea why it closed on me right then. I think I double-clicked when I should have single-clicked. But there is always a chance that the stuff will close on you, especially if you're trying to do some heavy lifting with it and your computer resources are sort of maxing out. So at this point, I'm going to show you how to actually save your project in the current configuration. And it's important for you to know that when you save the project, what you are doing is saving which GIS files are going to be in the layer tree over here that is basically being displayed, which one is on top, which one is below or in the middle, what the style is, what colors you have chosen, what symbols, shapes and sizes and line widths and colors that you have chosen, and what other map displays symbology you've put on here. What it doesn't do is save any current edits to a GIS file. So if you are digitizing or editing, for example, a vector points file or a vector lines file, there is a separate save button, and I'm going to show you that when we get to digitization. But for now, every time you've styled a map or you've added a new map and you've got the layer and you got it looking the way you want, you go to Project, and then you can just hit Save or Save As if you want to make a copy. And then next time you open QGIS, you can open the QGIS project file and it will take you right back to where you were in terms of which layers are already loaded into the project and what their styles and colors and all of that stuff is. So let's get started with a few more basics, okay? First thing that I want to do is to show you how to figure out something about the properties of your current GIS project. Now, when you create a new blank project in QGIS, you don't have to tell it the CRS. Remember, we talked about the coordinate reference systems in class on Monday. It will try to read in the CRS of the first layer you add to the project, and by default it makes that the base CRS of the project, and so it will then try and reproject on the fly any other layers that you are adding to that project so that they all overlap. But you have to realize that not all layers are necessarily going to be in the CRS of the project if you haven't reprojected them yourself, or if you don't know what CRS the file actually is in. QGIS will fake it for you, and for display purposes that's good enough, but when you want to do some editing on it or do some operations especially where you're trying to overlay two maps, that's where it's going to become more of a problem. So firstly, to get to the properties, click on the project file menu, and then you can see properties down here, and it will open the dialog. A lot of the properties, either for layers or for the project, open as dialogs in QGIS, and they're fairly similar. They have the different tabs over here on the left. Now, I may open to the general tab, which lets you do some basic properties. You can set the selection color and some other stuff, change the units that are displayed down below in the map window, etc., etc. But right now I want you to click on the CRS tab, and basically you're able to see which coordinate reference system is being used by this project. In this case, we are using a Universal Transverse Mercator, UTM zone, and it is the zone 36 North, which is the zone that actually covers this part of Jordan. And we're using the WGS 84 datum and ellipsoid. So all of that is sort of here, and I told you that there are these little codes. The codes are EPSG. There are a couple other kinds of codes like ESRI for Esri, and over here we have IGNF, but all of them are either numeric or alphanumeric codes, which are shorthand for the projection information that the GIS needs to know. Now, recent versions of QGIS actually show you this handy overview for the UTM zone. This literally shows you in red. This is the UTM zone. And if I was in zone 37, I'd be next to it, and etc., etc. And of course, north and south are for north and south of the equator. And this particular one is EPSG code 32636. Now, for latitude-longitude data, I just happen to have a few common ones that I've used. EPSG code 4326 is the WGS 84 datum ellipsoid, but with latitude-longitude unprojected geographic reference system. And you can scroll through down here to see all the different potential CRSs that there are, and this should underscore to you that knowing this stuff is actually really quite important. So it really does pay off to make sure that you've looked at the metadata of your input files ahead of time to make sure that they're all going to overlay as expected. Now, there are a whole bunch of other properties here, but for now we're going to leave those alone. You can explore some of those things on your own. You can, for example, create default styles, default colors, and if you're managing a big project where you're adding a bunch of new layers, this can be a time saver to set some of this stuff up in advance, just so you don't have to individually style each new layer that you're adding over time. But for now, since we're just sort of exploring QGIS, we're going to leave that alone, and we're going to just sort of move on with some more important stuff. Okay, so I mentioned last time that you have all of these tools. I want to show a couple important ones. Firstly, I want to show you the measure tool, and I briefly showed this last time, but I don't think it was displayed. So I'm just using my mouse wheel to scroll in, and I've opened the measure tool. And you can configure it in a couple different ways, but now you can actually see why it's important to know if you're clicking ellipsoidal or Cartesian, which is like the flat projected distance. But let's just say I want to know the distance between these two sites. I don't know what they are at the moment, but let me just suggest that I want to do that. I can, with the measure tool open, I can click on one, and you can see now I have this orange line that's sort of following my mouse cursor. Then I can click on the second one, and over here I've got the distance, 566.41 meters. And I can continue. I can measure like so, and like so, and like so. And if I double click or right click it, it will end the whole thing, and I will get all the segments listed here and the total length in meters of the full traverse, crossing through all of the points where I clicked on the map. And if I want that in kilometers or yards or miles or feet or whatever, I can just do that over here. And I can then copy all this stuff to the clipboard and paste it into a spreadsheet or a text file if I wanted to. Okay. You can configure some of this stuff by clicking the configuration over here so that you have essentially the default options that you want selected. So that is a very, very useful tool. Another useful tool is the show map tips. And what this can do, whoops, let me deselect the measurement tool by re-clicking the hand. Map tips allow you to get some quick information out of your vector files just by hovering over the top. Now you have to configure this in your properties. So if I right click on my WHS and I go to properties, and what I can do is to go down to where it says display, and it's got the checkbox for enable map tips. If not, you have to check that box. Then I can choose which column of data in the attribute table that I want to display. So I'm going to choose site number. And now when I hover over one of these, I actually get the site number from the database that should display, like so. Okay. So that is super useful. You can configure that in multiple ways. There are deeper dives. You can have, for example, if there are photos or something attached to this or more text information, you could really have a lot of information pop up over there. That's really useful for interaction. But let's say we wanted to put labels on all of the sites at once. You guessed it, we're going back to the properties. And here what we're going to do is to find the labels section. And by default there's no labels. But we have to click on that, and there are some more advanced things, but we're just going to click where it says single labels. And again, we are going to choose the column that makes the most sense for what we want. And in our particular case, again, we're going to stick with site num. Actually, check that. We are going to click on site type. And then we can configure our labels down here. We have text. We can change the font basically, and the size of the font, and the color of the font. Right, I'm going to leave the defaults here, size 10-point black font, because I also am going to put a buffer around this. I'm going to leave the defaults around, and what this is going to do is to put a white background behind the text so that they pop out. And what I also sometimes like to do is to put a shadow, a drop shadow behind it, which makes them look a little 3D. So let me just click OK so that you can see how that looks. So now we can see our black text with our white outline, and we have our shadow behind. Now in this particular case, we have a lot of sites, and this is a lot of text at certain zoom levels, but as we zoom in, you'll see that QGIS is doing a pretty good job trying to arrange them so that they don't overlap as best as possible. If you go back to the properties for the labels, there are a bunch of other options. You can specifically call out the point on the clock where you want the labels to generally stick. You can change the preferences for how it tries to auto-arrange them. You can have little lines that draw them together, and you can play around with some of these settings to see if they are useful to you. So let's just see how those callouts work. In this particular case, they don't really add one, but you can kind of see, they don't really add much, but you can kind of see them down there. And in some cases, that could be super useful for you as well. So I'm going to turn those off, and I'm actually going to turn the buffer off, and I'm going to turn the text to white. So I'm just going to do that. And that way, it's a little bit easier to read on this particular background. But I did leave the drop shadow, which I think is super useful for your eyes to be able to see it. Now you may be seeing like a lot of variation in terms of the site types, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, how do I just see sites of all one type versus another? And that's a really good question. We are going to do that next. So what we're going to do is to go back into this properties dialog. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can see everything here. And what you can do is to go to the attributes form. Let me pause for just a second so I'm telling you the right thing, because sometimes I forget my own self. All right, I got ahead of myself, sorry. What you need to do, you can get to the filter, is what I was trying to do, in one of two ways. The simplest way is to simply right-click and find where it says filter. So right-click on the vector file that you're trying to filter, and then click filter, and you'll get this query builder up here. You can also get to this through the attribute table, which is in the right-click menu as well. But this is the simplest way. So what we're going to do in the query builder, we're going to find the column that has site type, and we are going to create this equation. It's a Boolean equation, and this is how we query information out of a database. We're going to say, look in this particular column for this particular value, and if you find the case is true, a Boolean yes, then keep it, otherwise filter it away. Okay, so we're just going to double click there, and it shows up down here. And of course, we're going to click equals because we're trying to find values that equal. And then, if you don't have in your head all of the values in site type, you click all over here, and it's just going to get all of the different values that are possible, that exist in that column, and give you a list of them. Now, clicking all in our case makes sense because we have a finite number. If this was a numeric column, we might want to sample it to get just a range of values. But in this case, we have all of these things here. And we might want to know what those codes actually mean. So what we need to do is to go into our project file. Let me just get my window over here. And so in my GIS project file, Wadi Hassa, and within the vector, I have the database codes here, site type code. And we're going to open that with our spreadsheet. And I'm going to pause while mine loads because doing my video recording makes things go kind of slow. Okay, so you'll probably get this dialog that says import the CSV. This is your spreadsheet folder. And it should, as long as you have comma as the delimiter, it should read it just fine. So if we click OK, it'll then open it up and show you what the codes actually mean. So these are the codes that are in there. And the reason why there are codes in there is this is an old legacy data file from way back when computers didn't have a ton of memory. And in fact, the difference between having a database full of codes that are capped at something like 10 characters and having human readable ones was actually significant enough in terms of performance and storage where it made sense to create these smaller codes. What we're going to do is to find the code for village. That's how I have it written out in the project that you're following along with, so that's what we're going to do. So that code is VLLG. So back over here in the query builder, we can see VLLG, so we can just double click on that. And you can totally type in this area with your keyboard if you want, but double clicking all the symbols just sort of makes it simpler for you. Site type equals village. And we can hit test to say, yeah, that is going to return you something. If it says, nope, you did the wrong symbol there, you need to start from scratch. Now, this kind of querying is called SQL querying, and it is a deep rabbit hole, and eventually, if you want to make complex queries, you're going to want to learn something about SQL. But for now, a simple query, we're just trying to find all the sites where the site type column has the value VLLG in it. This very simple query here is going to do it. So if we click OK, what we can see now is that all of our sites, the big diversity of sites, are replaced, are removed, and the only ones that are left visible are VLLG. Now, they have not been deleted. If I want to undo the filter, I can basically copy that up and hit my delete key, and then we go back to everything, right? But for now, we're going to filter them like we did before. Site type equals, and we're going to get all of the values, scroll down to where we see village, and we click OK. So we were just temporarily masking out all the stuff that we don't want to see. So at this point, I'm going to show you one more thing for today, and that is how to use plugins in QGIS, and particularly how to use a plugin to get some high resolution imagery streaming down from the web. But prior to that, I want to point out that when you have a project where you've changed some stuff and you haven't saved it, it puts this little asterisk in the corner. And that is basically your moment to decide this is when I want to save. Okay, so now I'm going to hit save. What that means is next time I load this project, the filter that I just created is going to be active, and I'm still only going to see village sites. So I need to remember that I did that so I don't get confused as to what is going on at this particular moment. Okay? All right. Let's talk about plugins. Up here in the top, we have a couple of file options, and there are some native tools for analyzing vectors and rasters, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But importantly, there are a lot of plugins for QGIS, and all of them are available, again, free and open source. So we click on plugins, we go manage and install plugins, and it will connect to the official plugin repository, and it should give you a list of all the possible plugins. And I mean, look at how many of them. There are plugins for almost every conceivable thing that you're going to want to do in GIS, and again, they're all available for free. You just click on them, and it'll tell you install plugin. It'll tell you basically what the plugin does, and you can choose to install it. Now, the one plugin that I want you to install is one that lets you get, for example, Google Earth imagery streaming in to overlay with your native files that you're working with. And that plugin is called the QGIS. You can use this little search bar to find it. Now, I have it already installed in my QGIS, but actually, it looks like I need to upgrade the plugin. So instead of install, for me it says upgrade, but I'm going to click it, and it's going to go up to the repository and basically install it for you, or in my case, it will upgrade it for you. Now, if you want a shortcut to all the plugins you have installed, over here you can filter just by installed, you can filter by not installed, and you can change a few other things over here. But in our case, the HCM-GIS is probably one of the most useful plugins, especially for new users, but in general using QGIS. And depending on how the plugin is configured, it might show up as a new line in the plugin menu, or it may show up as a new file option, or it may show up as a new little tool to click in the toolbar here. HCM-GIS shows up in the menu bar up here. And here it's got a whole bunch of things that we're not going to use, including downloading open data and some other things, but we're going to go to where it says base maps. And basically you got lots of really great base maps. You know, all of the Google products You got Bing's product. You got this styled OpenStreetMap called Carto. You got the ESRI base maps. And you got a few other base maps that you can explore as well. For us, we're going to use the Google satellite because we're interested in imagery. We're archaeologists. We love imagery. So basically what we've got here is the Google satellite, and it is loaded, unfortunately, on top of our WHS sites, so I got to bring it down there. And this is the same imagery that's in Google Earth or in Google Maps, like on your phone. And what's really great is that it overlays really nicely. Now, I want you to note that the layer CRS for our WHS sites is this 32636 EPSG code, WS84 UTM zone 36 north. But for the Google satellite, the layer CRS is this pseudo Mercator WGS 84 EPSG code 3857. This is Google's compromise global latitude longitude projection system. Now, that's okay. It's actually overlaying reasonably well, and for display purposes that's not going to be a problem. But if we were to use this information in this projection system for any mathematical operations, that would probably cause some issues. So what we are able to do now is to actually explore some really high-resolution imagery in the vicinity of our sites. Now you'll see, that doesn't go down to nothing. There is a horizontal resolution sort of limitation to some of them. And if we don't like the Google imagery, we can try the Bing imagery, for example, and it might show us some other patterns because it might be taken at a different time of year or a different year and different lighting conditions. So that's really useful. And we can also see the Esri imagery if we want to, which is very similar in this case to the Bing imagery, if not the same. And we can hide them by unchecking them so that we're back to just our basic information over here. And we can show them sort of one at a time. And we can also flip back and forth quickly between them, again using these check marks over here. So eventually what we're going to do is to use this imagery to do some digitization. But for now, I think this practicum has gone on long enough, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun clicking around and zooming around inside the imagery. And again, remember that you can turn off the filter at any particular moment by going back into the query builder and deleting the expression, and then you can get all of this stuff. And you can go in to change the labels again in the property menu under labels, and you can even, like, let's go back to site-num, for example, and now we have site-num information overlaid on top of this as well. All right, I think I'm going to end it right there.